Some of you are probably watching the Olympics. It's hard to miss. And I watch it a little bit, take a glimpse now and again. I think there's a hockey game starting about now, something. Something Canada, Norway, something. Finland, one of those Scandinavian places. Finland, one of the things that I caught a glimpse of last week was the skeleton. This is the women's skeleton. It's spelled exactly like skeleton, and in which it's a single person event where you jump on a sleigh and you lie on your belly with your head first, and you zip down this ice hard track, which is probably about concrete. They go up to speeds of about 80 miles an hour, or 125 kilometers per hour. See, now I know why they call it the skeleton. You see, because if you go over the edge, you will soon be one. In the Summer Olympics, there's a sport which I've loved since high school. It was one of my things was the high jump, right? The high jump. And at one time at the Halliburton High School, in my category, I can't remember what it was, probably junior, I had the record for the high jump for like a whole year. Yes, thank you. Now, so as we moved up to the kind of more demanding levels, I ended up going to Peterborough for a meet. And I was up in Halliburton. I was so cool. I was running and jumping with my bare feet. You see, bare feet. And I got to Peterborough, and they had an asphalt runway. And all the guys had really fancy shoes on, except me. So I was way out of my league, skinned my toe all up, and that was the end of my high jump career. But that's another story. The current, not the world record holder, but the Olympic record holder, gold medalist for the high jump, is a guy named Charles Austin. And he made his record in 1996. So we've had 4 Olympics since then that he hasn't as yet been beat. And his height that he attained was 7 foot 10 inches. You can imagine. That's way up over everybody's head here. What was I don't want to say. It was 5 something. Thanks, Gary. You had to ask that, didn't you? So 7 foot 10 inches. That is a high bar. I've called today's sermon the high bar. Now, so what if they said that suddenly the skeleton speed that you were required to make the cut was like 500 kilometers per hour? Or what if the high bar that you had to reach to attain anything nowadays was 20 feet? You know, what? You can't do it. It's impossible. The bar is too high. But this is exactly or basically what Jesus called for, morally speaking, in the Sermon on the Mount. He puts that bar way up there, and unless you're dishonest with yourself, you're going to have to say, you know what? It's way, way above my head. The Pharisees actually were the moral Olympians of Jesus' day, if you will. The moral Olympians. They were the ones that studied and worked hard to keep all the laws, and they had 613 that they kept in a bunch around those, just in case. Just kind of have they call it the fence around the law. So they had all kinds of ways to keep externally the rules that they thought were important, Moses' law as they knew it. So the scribes and the Pharisees, and Jesus talks a lot about them, and they're all through the Gospels. They pervade the Gospels. Now the idea is not that we're just supposed to look at them and say, oh, those Pharisees and Sadducees, glad to see there's nobody like that around anymore. Because to some degree, usually they are us. And especially if we are religious types, or those that profess to be people that know God, we have a tendency that way. And there's a bit of a Christians, sadly, to some degree, to a large degree, have got a name for it. So it's not like a phenomenon that's gone away that was in the first century. It's something that's very common. And it's not just about religion, it's about people from any walk of life who think they're better than others, who, kind of have that superior attitude. So Jesus, he's on them pretty hard all the time. Oh, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. But the people had held them in very high honor and they admired them greatly because of their ability. They took a lot of time to do it, to keep all these rules. And Jesus says to them, "For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven." Ouch! So not only these guys who are the moral Olympians of the age, you got to be not just as good as them, but way better than them. It's got to be, you got to surpass them. So to Jesus' first hearers, you got to know that that was a super high bar, and it had to have grabbed their attention at that point. Now, there's reason and method in Jesus' madness, if you will. I mean, he has a reason for doing this, and not to frustrate us, but a purpose in saying what he says. And we're going to get into that a little bit today. He loved the law. So the Pharisees, they claim to be keepers of the law, but Jesus would have really loved the law of God. And so he says, for instance, in the same passage, he says, "I did not come to abolish them." I mean, Jesus had this way of seeming like he was very free, and he was very spontaneous, and he was very vivid in the way he spoke. And people kind of got to think, well, he doesn't even keep the rules. He doesn't keep the law. He hangs out with the wrong people and all that kind of stuff. He says, "I did not come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish them, but to fulfill them." He says, "Until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will be by any means disappear until everything is accomplished." And then he goes on to say, whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever doesn't do them and teaches other people not to do them will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. So he really admires and holds a high place in his heart for the law, if you will, the law of Moses. And he would have known, for instance, the Psalms off by heart. We believe that most of these guys would have known the whole, what we call the Old Testament, off by heart. So they didn't have written materials except in the synagogues. So the biggest and longest chapter, it's a chapter, but it's also a psalm, is the 119th Psalm. It's 176 verses long, and it's cut into 22 chunks, each one starting and having to do, I guess it starts with a letter in the Hebrew alphabet. And each one of those chunks has 8 verses, and each verse says something positive about the law, or the decrees, or the statutes, or the word, or the promises. You get the point? So, for instance, the first section is, "Blessed are those whose ways are blameless, who walk according to the law of the Lord. Blessed are they who keep his statutes and seek him with all their heart. They do nothing wrong, they walk in his ways." And it goes on and on. So 176 verses like that. Every single verse has got some mention of the law in it. Quite intriguing. So Jesus would have had that in his heart. And the law is really quite amazing. It's so wise and fair and strong and kind of simple that when you read it, you got to say, wow, that's so right. Like just an example from Exodus 23. Here it says, "Laws of justice and mercy. Do not spread false reports." This is kind of the finer details on do not make false. Do not make false witness. Do not bear. Thank you. Do not bear false witness. So now it's getting broken down here to what that might mean in finer points. Do not spread false reports, like gossip. Do not help a wicked man by being a malicious witness. Do not follow the crowd in doing wrong. Not that we're inclined to do that at all, right? When you give testimony in a lawsuit, do not pervert justice by siding with the crowd. And do not show favoritism to a poor man in his lawsuit. So you might think, oh, he's poor, give him a break. He says, doesn't matter. Impartiality. Do not show favoritism to a poor man in his lawsuit. If you come across your enemy's ox or donkey wandering off, be sure to take it back to him. I know what we replace that with. Is skidoo, is ATV wandering off? If you see the donkey of someone who hates you fallen down under its load, do not leave it there. Be sure you help him with it. Even if he hates you, go help him. Do not deny justice to your poor people in their lawsuits. That's the other side. Do not deny them justice. Have nothing to do with a false charge, and do not put an innocent or honest person to death, for I will not acquit the guilty. That's just a little hint of the wonder of the wisdom of the law of God. And Jesus says, not one jot or tittle is what the King James says. My version says, not the smallest letter nor the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law. Now, what Jesus goes on to do in the Sermon on the Mount, in detail, to explain in detail how it was that the Pharisees, although they kept the law, they just really didn't get it. And most of us don't really get it either. So he explicates or kind of unfolds, unravels for us the depths of the meaning of what the law is really saying. And the chunk we're going to look at today has to do with the sixth commandment, murder. And then he talks about adultery. He talks about some of the other commandments as he goes through the sermon. And he kind of breaks it down for us. So sure, Jesus is basically saying, sure, there's a commandment, the sixth commandment, thou shalt not kill. Do not murder. Pretty basic. We may think that's fairly straightforward, and we haven't broken that commandment. Good for you. That commandment at that level is something that our society as a whole can kind of do something about. We can curb people's inclinations to kill one another by putting laws in place, having courts, having police, having a justice system, throwing them in jail if they do it, or executing them in some parts of society. So it's something that we can sort of sink our teeth into as a society as a whole. But is that really what God was after in the commandment, thou shalt not kill? He just really doesn't want us killing each other. Well, of course he doesn't. But could it be that he's after something deeper? And that's just kind of the basic thing. He wants more from us than not killing one another. He is after something much deeper, much more comprehensive. In fact, he wants us to live in love, to treat one another in love. Jesus says, second commandment, first is love the Lord your God, second is love your neighbor as yourself. And that means living in community, living in harmony with everybody around us. And in order for that to happen, we need to look rather deeply into our hearts and our minds and our words. Our hearts, our minds, and our words. And we see that now as Jesus, starting in verse 21, kind of unfolds his message. He says, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to his brother, Raca, is answerable to the Sanhedrin, the high council. But anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Okay. So so this word Raca is an Aramaic word, which is the language that Jesus and his contemporary Jews spoke, and that just meant something like you worthless nothing. We don't really have an exact translation, but it's some worthless person, or it's a way of demeaning someone who you consider to be worthless. Fool, the word in the Greek is the same word as I think it's moros, which is the same root from which we get moron. Okay, but anyone who says you fool will be in danger of the fire of hell. That's the word in the Greek is actually once again from the Hebrew or Aramaic Gehenna, which was kind of the garbage pit of Jerusalem. It's where they threw out all the refuse. And you remember the good old days when we didn't have, what do you call these things now? The dump. We don't call them a dump. Landfill site, thank you. Before that we had the dump and it was on fire all the time. Remember those days? The smoke went up forever. So that's the picture. I mean, that's been historically the way people have dealt with the garbage from the town, since time immemorial. So in Jerusalem, they had one in the Valley of Hinnom, or Gehenna. And that's the word Jesus uses that gets translated hell in our English Bibles. But the actual word in the Greek is from the Aramaic or the Hebrew, Gehenna. So Jesus is using some pretty strong language here about saying things like raka, which is like you blockhead, or you fool, you idiot. He says, whoever says that will be in danger of the fire of Gehenna. Well, there's something for us to think about. Now, Jesus, I think, is not making a new and harder rule for us. Like the rule, you shall not call anybody an idiot, right? I mean, that's just would be adding law to law. I don't think that's what he's saying. And in fact, I back that up by saying that Jesus himself calls people idiots in the Gospels. Well, he calls them fools. And there's several occasions where he does. And I think it's the same word that's translated here as you fool. So for instance, he says it to his disciples. He says, oh, fools and slow of heart, not to believe all that is written in the law and the prophets. What is the matter with you lunkheads? So he's not exactly saying don't say these words. People call me an idiot all the time. And, what? Nothing? A fool for, thank you, Sue. Isn't that a nice way to put it? A fool for Christ. Usually they say it because maybe, I've been clowning around too much or just full of silliness, or I've done something dumb, right? So it's like, you idiot. But the thing is, it's within the context of someone that I know loves me. And it's usually someone in my family or some good friend that's saying this to me. And I value that. I think that's part of close friendship, is where you can say that kind of thing back and forth to each other. Is Jesus saying, oh, that's wrong? I don't think so. I think what he's saying is when you use it and you really mean it in its demeaning form, like, you are just, you idiot. Like you really resent, hate, and are angry with someone, and you want to let them have the full barrel shotgun from your tongue. That's what he's talking about. And that so often actually happens. And when it does, when that does happen, and when we do that to each other, it actually kills something inside us. It kills something inside us. So that's where we get the parallel now to the whole idea of thou shalt not kill, you shall not murder. In the last few decades, there's been rather a growing sensitivity in our society to verbal and emotional abuse, right? We hear about it quite a bit. If you listen to the media, you're involved with the educational system, there's quite a bit of talk about emotional and verbal abuse. And that's changed. That's just new in the last few decades. When I was a child, I don't think I'd ever heard these terms. But they were very real things. So here's an instance where something that society is kind of sinking their teeth into is, I think, a good thing. It's a good thing that we should be aware of these things. It's a good thing that we should seek to curb these things. I'm not sure how effective the means at the disposal of our society, how effective those means are, because what power do they have to actually change people's hearts and change the way they treat one another? Even though there's a lot of it in the educational system these days, there's still a lot of this stuff going on. It's a big problem. And when it happens, and it does happen so much, if it happens in families, it happens against children when they're small. It happens against spouses. And in many other ways. I mean, it happens between us as we're adults. It can happen to us. It happens in the workplace. It happens peer to peer. It has a killing effect on people's souls, on their sense of self-worth. It has a killing effect on people's confidence. It's got a killing effect on our ability to cope with life. It's got a killing effect on our emotional well-being. Is it murder? Kind of. A woman named Patricia Evans has actually I just put this on the internet search, I put verbal abuse in, and her site comes up. And she just headlines it with this saying at the top of her website or her blog or whatever it was: verbal abuse is insidious. Verbal abuse is endemic. Verbal abuse impacts millions of people, probably more like billions. Verbal abuse and its denial are crazy making, and it's denial. Verbal abuse usually occurs in secret. So she just puts that out as a teaser at the top of her, and she's got a lot of interesting information. See, the truth is the opposite of what verbal abuse claims. Because the truth is the truth as God sees it. And the truth as God sees it is that each and every human being is super, super worthy to Him. We're super valuable to Him. We're super precious to Him. We cannot begin to imagine how much He treasures us and how precious we are to Him. You are to Him. How much He cares about you and wants the very, very best for you. Wants you to be all that He made you to be. I mean, He made you. He made you unique and gave you all kinds of gifts and put you in situations in order that your life might blossom and you might be all that He created you to be. That's His plan for you. And He doesn't like it when things get in the way. And one of the things that gets in the way a lot is when people come along and decry you and demean you and put you down. And when they do it to children, it affects them for their lives until they find some way of getting healed of that. And I would say this, that Jesus Christ is the main way for people to be healed of that. Because as we encounter Jesus, we encounter the love of God in its purest form. The cross of Jesus Christ is God saying, this is how much I love you. I will die for you individually. I care that much. I will bleed and die and suffer and be tortured because you are precious to me. And whenever we demean one another, we're naysaying what God has done through Christ. And when we grasp what He's done for us and how much He cares for us, it's very healing. We begin to understand that the value He has for us and the treasure we are to Him. And it can change us. You know, if we prayerfully work through that, work at it, we can find ourselves healed. Now, I found myself healed by the grace of God. Because I think that pretty much all of us, I hesitate to say all, but I think it's all, to some degree, have suffered this kind of thing in life. To one degree or another. Some extreme degrees, others to lesser degrees. Where we've been wounded, we've been shot down, we've been put down. Christ came to raise us up, to lift us up. Sinclair Ferguson wrote this. He's a Bible commentator. Jesus recognized, this is in thinking about these words of Jesus, about saying raka and saying you fool and this kind of language. Jesus recognized that we cannot be trusted in our judgment of the seriousness of careless speech. We treat the damage we do with our lips very lightly because we do not see the corpses we leave behind. That is why Jesus invades our moral slumber by telling us how serious this is in the sight of God. He uses language we readily understand. Anger incurs judgment. Using terms of contempt, like raka, is worthy of condemnation by the highest court. Calling someone a fool fits us for hell. So this is Jesus' vivid way of talking, right, to get his point across. Jesus is probably not placing these sins on a scale of seriousness in the kingdom of God. He is simply stressing vividly that they are far more serious than most of us assume. In fact, our insensitivity to their real seriousness is indicative of the dullness of our spiritual senses. I thought, ooh, that cuts to the quick, right? He is simply stressing vividly that they are far more serious than most of us assume. So this is the high bar that Jesus sets forward for us. And there's several reasons for it. One of the reasons is, for starters, because it's true. It's true. And Jesus never shirked from the truth. So when you say things and when you're, he talks about being angry. When you're angry with your brother, there's a good anger and there's a bad anger. But he's talking about the bad anger here. I mean, you can be angry with the things that people do, but the kind of anger that just resents and hates another, it's damaging, it's deadly, and it's the thing that the murder actually proceeds from. And the words that we use and the demeaning, all those kinds of things, they're very destructive. And Jesus is telling us in no certain terms that God takes them quite seriously. So that's one point. So it's just true that that's out there. And it's a very big problem in our society, and it's affected all of our lives to some degree. And the other thing is, when Jesus sets the bar up there, we all know that we've fallen short. We have all failed, all of us. And that's important. It's important to know that because that's what drives us to the cross. Now we're here today, I think, because we're looking for grace. We're looking for to encounter God. And the way that happens is to understand your need. You and I have fallen short. And we need the cross of Christ. We need his forgiveness. We need to be washed clean. And when we come to Christ, that's what we get. We get complete, utter, total, absolute forgiveness for everything that we've ever done. And we're emptied of that. But that's not the whole bit. If that were the whole bit, we'd still be kind of left hanging. The point of I don't know if it's the greater point, but the other side of the gospel, the other side of the thing is that God has got a way for us to jump the bar. And that is that he comes and lives within us. He pours his Holy Spirit into us. The character of Jesus Christ is being formed in us by grace. And as the years unfold, this is an ongoing process. This is not an instantaneous thing. And as we grow in that grace, and Christ is more and more formed in us, we treat other people with the value that God treats them with. We look at them with his eyes. We see them for how beautiful that they are and how precious they are to him. We begin to treat them more and more and more that way as we grow. And we love each other as he does. And those are pretty good reasons for Jesus to set this up like this. I mean, a lot of that gets explained more and more as you read the rest of the New Testament. But Jesus is right in telling us this is really what it's all about. God's law is good. It's given in order that we might have a care for each other and hold each other as precious. And he makes that possible through what Jesus Christ has done for us. And this is good news. Shall we pray?